In this video I'm going to talk about discovered check and discovered attacks, and think about what that means. A discovered check or a discovered attack, it's discovery, and then occurs when a piece moves, but when it moves it reveals an attack or it reveals a check from another piece. And so on the screen you can see here that the white queen actually would be checking the black king if the bishop wasn't in the way. And so if I move the bishop, we have what's called a discovered check or discovered attack. A discovered check in this case because it is a check. And it's important to note that we always want to find the best square to move the moving piece to. Now, my computer here draws this red arrow. That's not where I'm going to move the bishop to. I'm actually going to place the bishop right here on b5 because think about this. That discovered check by the queen, it has been discovered because a different piece moved out of the way. But at the same time, this bishop move is very strong as it blocks this black queen. This black queen can no longer come in here to block that check. Not only that, but the black king, there's no way to block the queen check. The black king is going to have to move. Okay, it can't move here because of the bishop, and it's going to have to move here or here. So once it moves, now it's important to realize that white wins the queen because the queen is just sitting there under attack and it cannot do anything because of the check. So with discovered checks, it's important to note a few things. Number one, as this board position, I have a new board position. You can always pause these before I give them away if you'd like. But the important thing is to note, look for a piece that might be checking the king, but maybe it's being blocked right now. And once it's being blocked, try to decide where you want to move the piece that's blocking it. And look and consider all of the possible squares. So I'm going to highlight the squares that this knight could move to. The knight could move to any of these squares. Now, can you find which one of those would be the strongest move? And the move knight to b3 actually would become really, really critical and important, and it's a crushing blow to white. Look at what it's doing. Once that the knight moves to the b3 square, and I'll move it there just so we can kind of clear the board and see, we have to remember now there's a check here. And so white has to deal with that check. Now they could deal with it by moving out of check, and if they move out of check, then the knight is going to take the... Another option is for white to block the check. Well, the beauty of this move is the bishop is going to take the queen, and the additional beauty is that the knight is guarding that square. So even when the bishop takes the queen, or the knight could take the queen, the king really can't do anything about it because their pieces are guarded. So that's a really strong move. Now, I'm going to put another board position on here, and there's actually two discovery checks sitting on the board right now. The first would be by the rook on d1 that would like to check the king, but that there's a piece blocking it, and that piece is the white king. So sometimes it's nice to realize that, okay, the white king can move out of the way, and now it has some squares it can choose from, but I think I would move it to c3 because now that the rook is checking, black has to deal with the check. And once it deals with the check, the king is free to take that knight. So we're going to win a knight out of this. And if by chance black wants to move this knight to block the check, that's not really going to matter because then I could just take it here. So that is one option when it comes to a discovery check on the board. Now there's another discovery check on the board, and that's with the bishop. We can see that the bishop is here, and I will erase that line. There's a discovery check. This one's a little bit different because we'd have to be aware that the rook is attacking that bishop. So technically if we check the king with it, the rook could always take it if they want to. But there's a way to maybe help us out a little bit here. So we want to move this knight to discover that check. And if I were to play the knight to f7, this is actually a really nice move because there's a check. In fact, it's a double check. Both pieces are checking. And so that means this time that this rook is not allowed to take the bishop because the knight is also doing the checking. At the same time, the knight happens to be forking both pieces. This is a beautiful move. And so, really, the black pieces has to decide, how am I going to deal with this? So they're just going to have to move their king. Now, if they were to move forward, they have put themselves in a position to be discovered checked by the rook again. So I'm just going to move them off to the side here. And note, we have an option now just to take this rook, and this is beautiful. This should be a one game for white. As far as, now I've done 3 discovery checks, but let's look at maybe a discovered attack. Now, in this position, there aren't really any pieces that are going to have a discovered check on the black king right now, but there is a very important discover attack on the queen. We've got this bishop kind of lurking and hiding behind the knight, and the bishop is also being guarded by the king. So the king is guarding this here. Now, that means this knight, if this knight moves out of the way, we get that lovely attack on the queen, kind of hoping that our opponent doesn't see it in a way. Now, in this position, though, even if the black pieces sees that attack, it's too late because of where we can play the knight. We could play knight to h4 and make sure you note that's a check, which means black has to deal with the check before they can deal with anything else. We could play, if we like to play our knights more central to the board, which is typically where we probably should play them, we could play knight to e5, which is also a check. And so it's important to note that the second we move this knight, we have a beautiful attack on the queen that the black pieces can't do anything about because they're forced to deal with the check at the same time. So that's a discovered attack, not a discovered check. It is a normal check because the knight moved and checked the king. But when the knight moved and checked the king, we have this attack on the queen. And now, whatever black does to stop that check, we are going to take the queen. This is good for us. Important to note. Okay, and another board position here, I'm just going to move a couple pieces, and this happens frequently when people bring out their queen a little too early. But we can look at another discovered attack here and realize that on this discovered attack, a lot of times the queen is the vulnerable piece in a discovered attack, not always, but the goal is for us to gain an advantage or gain a piece. And so we need to see as white that our bishop has this nice alignment with the black queen. Okay, now with that alignment, we also have to keep in mind and be a little bit careful here that the queen is attacking that pawn right there and we don't have anything defending it. But in this position, we'd be looking at a move where we want that maybe bishop to line up on that queen there with an attack. And notice when I push my pawn up 2, so I played a pawn to d4, that I get this attack here on that bishop. So if the bishop just wants to take that, well, that wouldn't be a good move because I have a lot of better moves as white, okay, like taking that queen right there. Okay, if my queen decides to come down here and take this, well, I would need to decide here what I'd like to do. Now I have to be very careful because this queen can take that rook. But luckily this bishop is right here. It can play right there to guard that rook, keeping in mind it's guarded by the knight. So these pieces are all guarding each other and working together and interacting together. And so now the queen's going to have to escape. They don't want to lose their queen. Well, in fact, they can't play to the f1 square because the king could take it. They can't take any pieces around here because they're all guarded. They can't play here because it's defended by the pawns. They can't play to h3 because it's defended by the knight. They can't play to g4 because it's defended by the bishop. They cannot play to g5. That's defended by the bishop. They only have one safe square, and that's g6 here that they're going to play to. Now remember, a little while back, we had this pawn attack on the bishop. Now's the time. I'm going to take that bishop, and now I've gained a bishop, and I've gained a bishop, and I've only lost a pawn, which is typically good news for me. So there you go. That was a nice use of a discovered attack to gain an advantage. So I'm going to show you just a couple more here. So we note on this move, that we've got the queen aligned on the on the king, and the knight is in the way. So right now we're looking at a discovery check. Now once we realize we have a discovery check on the board, we need to decide where we're going to move this knight. And so we have to make some decisions, and we've got to analyze all the squares the knight can move to. Now, there are some really good moves with the knight, and to tell you the truth, they're just about all good moves with the knight. But I'm going to look at just a couple because I feel like these would be situations at our level that we should understand. So I'm going to look at knight moves to b5. So if I play knight to b5, then I've got this discovered check along the way, and this king is in a little bit of trouble, and I gain a pawn. Okay, that's kind of a nice advantage, and I should win this game. I could play knight takes f7, check. Remember, the queen is checking, and I can note that once the king moves, I then can take a rook. So that looks really nice because my knight's going to come in here, and once they deal with the check, I'm going to take a rook. So it's pretty good to pick up a rook. Now I could also play, the other one I'm going to look at is knight to e4 check. Whoops, I'm sorry. I'm going to look at knight to f5 check. Now with this one, this is kind of cool, and I'm going to play it just so I can show more after I play this. So black moves out of check, but they had to deal with that check, and now it's important to note with that move, I have a rook attacking a bishop along with the knight attacking the bishop. And so I'm going to win that bishop 2 pieces versus nothing. And with that discovered check, I've picked up a bishop. So I've looked at different ways. Some I pick up a pawn, one I pick up a rook, one I pick up a bishop. It just kind of depends on how you feel and where you want your pieces to be and whatnot, things like that. So the last position I'm going to look at is this one, and this one is actually pretty cool. My opponent just made a mistake by playing their bishop to h6. And bishop to h6, I can see their logic is they're trying to attack the rook here and thinking that they could maybe pick up something or gain an advantage. But little do they know that that bishop sitting there, there's nothing guarding it. So note that bishop sitting there, there's absolutely nothing guarding that. And at the same time, I've got a bishop that could attack it. Now it'd be nice if that bishop could attack it, but you know, if I just kind of move a rook here, that'd be bad. Somewhere in here, okay, that would be bad. He could take my bishop, whatever. But the fact that this rook can take the rook at the bottom, and the fact that the killer move is there's a check right there when I take it. What that means is, and I'm going to play it, rook takes check. Okay, rook takes check. And now guess what? Well, they've got to take care of that check. Now, there's a lot of ways that black could take care of the check. Okay, they could take the rook here. They could block the check. They could do a lot of different things. The important note here is I just took a rook. So I won a rook, and they haven't gotten anything yet. Now, if they block the check with the bishop, I'm going to move my rook back, and I just got a free rook. If they take my rook with their queen, it's important to note that I now have this attack on that bishop. So I had a discovered attack sitting right there. And I'm going to take this bishop, which means, guess what? I just got a free bishop because of a discovered attack. So good luck looking at these tricky combinations and moves. Discovery is really, really cool, and when you can get them to happen, make them happen, and find them, you'll find yourself making some pretty cool moves and some moves that really, really punish your opponent.